Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another session of Talking History Online for this strange year 2020 that we're finding ourselves in. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christy Kokiki. I'm the Director of Public Engagement here at the History Trust of South Australia. And I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging that this land we're broadcasting on is the land of the Kaurna people, and that I'm personally coming to you from Kaurna land. And we'd like to recognise that the History Trust of South Australia respects the primary place of Aboriginal people in the history of this place. We acknowledge that our story commenced long before Governor Hindmarsh proclaimed the new province of South Australia on the 28th of December 1836. And that Aboriginal people have a long history that extends millennia into the past. We acknowledge that Aboriginal land and sovereignty were not recognised, and that building a shared understanding of our history is crucial to reconciliation and to creating a positive future for all of us here in South Australia. Okay, so as I said, welcome. Welcome to the fifth installation of Talking History Online. Tonight's webinar is, we're going to start with a pre-recorded presentation from James and Jack. That presentation will run for about 30 minutes, after which we will go into a Q&A session with James and Jack. So before we start, the other thing I would really like to do is to give a quick shout out to the awesome History Trust team that are behind the scenes here tonight and are behind the scenes of every webinar that we hold. Tonight we have Britt Burton and Jade Cornish. They're making all the technical wizardry work tonight. Okay, so we'll get into it. So tonight we are hearing from James Tylor and Jack Buckskin, who are going to talk to us about the local environment of the Adelaide Plains, from a contemporary Indigenous Kaurna perspective. And the presentation will look at the different seasons and look at the plants, the Indigenous plants, animals and climate, and how this has been informed by Kaurna language and culture in the region. Now, James Tylor is a Kaurna artist and researcher with a master's degree in visual arts and design from the South Australian School of Art. He's practiced as a professional visual artist for 10 years and has exhibited throughout Australia and internationally. And Jack Buckskin is a Kaurna, Narungga and Wurrungal man born in Adelaide, who's dedicated himself to learning and sharing Kaurna language and culture. He's been involved in the Kaurna revitalisation movement for 15 years and continues to contribute to the development and teaching of Kaurna language and culture. On that note, I will hand over to Britt, who will start the presentation.
Kaurna environment, plants, animals, seasons, culture and history. This is a co-presentation with James Tylor and Jack Buckskin. I'm James Tylor and I'm a Kaurna visual artist. I've been researching Kaurna plants for the past 5 years, and during this presentation I'm going to share with you some of the stuff that I've learned.
My name's Jack Buckskin. I'm a Kaurna language teacher, cultural educator and cultural performer. I'll be sharing a bit of language and culture throughout this presentation.
Ngadlo Kaurna miana tampendi. We acknowledge the Kaurna people. Parnayata matanya buki nanku. They're the landowners from long time ago. Ngadlo tampendi Kaurna miana boroporana. We recognize the Kaurna people are still alive. Pankarawama Kaurna, Kaurna Kundiyata. The territory of the Kaurna Plains is exclusively Kaurna land.
Warning. This presentation contains images of Aboriginal people who have passed.
Disclaimer. This Kaurna plant presentation is a basic introductory guide to edible Indigenous plants of the Adelaide area. Please do further research and correctly identify a plant as safe to eat before you consume any plant in the wild. Your safety is your responsibility. Kaurna Yarta is Kaurna country, which extends from Crystal Brook in the north to Cape Jervis in the south. Follows the Mount Lofty Ranges to the east and the St. Vincent's Gulf to the west. Our immediate neighbours are the Ngarrindjeri and Ramangeri from the Lower Lakes and Coorong, the Mirril from the Murray region, the Ngadjeri from the Barossa Valley, the Nukunu from the Port Pirie area, the Narunga from the York Peninsula, and the Bungala from the Port Lincoln area. Built Audley, or the Possum's House, was Adelaide's first Aboriginal mission from 1838 to 1845. It was known by a couple of names like the Native Location, the Native School, and the Native Asylum. It was situated in the parklands between North Adelaide and South Adelaide. The first Kaurna dictionary was created there in 1840 by the German missionaries, as they tried to record and convert Aboriginal people to Christianity. After the closure of Birtawadley, Kintor Avenue School, or known as the English-only school, was established in 1845 and lasted till 1851. The students of this school then later moved to Punindi Mission, which was established in 1850 and lasted until 1894. Due to the popular inclusion of Aboriginal people from around Australia, other missions were created, such as Point Pearce Mission, which was established in 1868, and Rowcombe Port Macleay Mission, established in 1859, later closed from 1967 to 1974, where they now remain as country towns.
Some facts that are interesting in regards to plants, animals, seasons, and cultural objects. The 60 plants were recorded in Kaurna language historically, but only 30 of them we can attribute to species today. In the future, we'll try and rename about 300 plants that have known Indigenous uses. So these will be plants that Kaurna people used and would have had names for. But there is in total about 1,500 plants. 120 are edible, and you can eat their leaves or their roots or berries and so on. And about 180 have medicinal uses. So there was quite a lot of plants used by Kaurna people. Animals were a bit more well documented, with 170 names recorded, and there's only about 330 land-based animals. The figure presented doesn't include marine animals. So that record's a little bit more complete, probably one of the more complete ones. About 6 seasons were recorded, or roughly 5 with a sub-season, which was for migration. But of that, we can only really attribute 4 of them based on the European 4-season calendar. So that was a bit of a sad loss, because there would have been a lot of interesting information that could have been attained for better farming, better gardening, and better understanding of our environment. And there's about 90 cultural objects that Kaurna people used, and about 20 of those were used for ceremonial objects, and the other 70 were used in everyday use. And we'll cover a couple of those during this presentation.
Wartari is the summer months from January to March. Warta, it means hot. Wartari is the hot season. Yarlamai is seafood, and the literal translation of seafood, which include Tarnibaicha, the crab, Tukukungala, the prawn, and in some cases Ngaltaicha, which is the yabby. Kuya is our word for fish. Lots of different species had different names, and some of the other species, like crabs, fit under the term kuya. Kuya berry is the fishing hook. Dendomata is the shellfish. And this picture is taken down at Parongapari, which is the Gola region on Ngarrindjeri country. A few different techniques in the fishing game was either spearing the fish or even using nets where people would hold and others could herd the fish into the nets.
Kakala, or angleleaf pigface, is a coastal succulent that grows particularly in the dunes, but it can grow up on the plains as well. Kaurna people used to eat the leaves with meat because they have quite a glutinous textured leaf, but you can blanch them and put them into salads and stuff like that, and they pair really well with fish, but also with meat. In the summertime you get a pink berry that grows on it, which you call in Kaurna multu. It has a salty fajua flavour or a salty fig flavour, and they're quite nice. You can dry them out and then they get a quite nice toffee flavour. There is another species that is edible and can be used in the same way, but it comes from South Africa, and it has a dark green leaf opposed to the kakala plant, which has a light green leaf. You can also distinguish them by rubbing your finger across the tip of the angled leaf, and you will get a rough sawn texture to the leaf on the introduced plant from South Africa. Other things you can do with this medicinally is if you have sunburn, you can break the leaf open and rub it across sunburn, which is really kind of good at soothing that burning feeling. You can also use it to treat a couple of other things like jellyfish bites, because you kind of use it in the same way you do aloe vera. It's also a really good garden plant. It's very salt tolerant. Another thing to kind of look out for is if the leaves are red, it kind of shows that there's a high salt content, so those ones will be particularly salty and you might want to avoid them. You can also find another similar looking species on the coastline of South Australia, which we call nyanki, which is our word for woman, as well as for this plant, and we call it the round leaf pigface. It's easy to distinguish between the kakala plant with the sharp leaf, because this one has a round one, and it's really good for eating just as is. You can't eat the fruit of this plant, but you can take the leaves and you can blanch them and use them in salads. They pair really good with seafood. You can also, if you're really, really thirsty, you can squeeze them in your hand and let the water run down your thumb and then into your mouth, and you can get water if you don't have water with you. And I've been caught out once when I was on the coast when I didn't have my water with me and needed something to drink, so I squeezed the leaves and drank the water of the nyanki plant.
Mandari is the name for muntries. This name is also referred to the apple today, because for our people this was our native or indigenous apple-like fruit.
Wadney is our name for the niter bush, and you can get an edible berry in the summertime, which tends to be somewhere between a red and a black coloured grape looking fruit. It has a large seed like an olive, but it has a salty sweet flavour, kind of like a salty sultana. They're very moorish, and you get quite a lot on the bush, so they're a really good snack when you're down by the beach or along the coastline. You find them at the tops of cliffs, in the dunes. You get quite a lot of them. They're really good, arid plant, good to grow, and you get a beautiful snack on them. They're quite nice. Some people make jams out of them too.
Birira was recorded as a lettuce-like food. Some could say it's the warrigal green or the spinach. Niplena is a name for saltbush. This name is actually borrowed from the Adyamatna term.
Parecha is the common name for seaweed. You can eat most seaweeds. It just comes down to the texture and if it's palatable. So some of my favourite seaweeds that I like are golden kelp, sea lettuce, and crayweed. I particularly like the olive-shaped bladders that you get on crayweed. They do taste like an olive, but they just come without the seed. And they're really good in soups, and they're good paired with seafood.
Barnari is the autumn months from April to June. This picture's from Waktiparinga on Kaurna country. Barnari also relates to the autumn star, because this star comes into the sky and sits near the moon during this time. Barnapi is our word for mushroom, with lots of different variations and only a few words recorded. It's unsure of which this name could be.
Wadley is a Kaurna house or a hut. Historically, they were constructed as a dome structure out of large branches, then covered with smaller branches, and then thatched with grass. And a small fire was placed at the entrance. And depending on the time of the year, the Wadley would change in design. So during the wet and cold half of the year, Kaurna people used to migrate from the coast up into the plains in front of small forests, generally situated near a valley and a river, and would build small villages called Wadley Wadley, so many huts. And the huts would be built a lot thicker because of the cold, wet weather. So branches would be taken out of the nearby Wirra forests and would build a large dome that could house about 5 people, and it would be thatched with leaves and grass, and then sometimes covered in mud to make it thicker. Or in the case of incoming hailstorms, people would cover them with dry bark as well to give extra protection. And a large fire was placed at the front to give warmth. And Kaurna people would wear cloaks during the winter months, and they would be then used as blankets, and then people would sleep on tuturon on dry grass beds. And a good example of one of these dwellings is this picture taken during Parnapi by Alexander Schramm, and I believe this was drawn at Piltawadley in the Adelaide Parklands, and in the corner of the image you can see the Torrens River, and so you can see that Wadley villages were quite large, housing somewhere up to about 100 people in one large family, or just a couple of other families would come and visit at different times of the year. During the hotter, drier months of the year, Kaurna people would migrate to the coast, where the air is a lot cooler coming off the sea during the hotter days of the year. The huts will be lightly thatched, again with a fire in the front built out of branches, but they would only be protecting really from the sunlight during the day, and a little bit of mist and sea mist that you would get. And Kaurna people would make small temporary dwellings so they could move up and down the coastline. But Kaurna people usually would go to the same places where they would know that there was a camp had been there before and there was plenty of fish, or it was a good site for collecting fruit that are in the dunes during the summer months. And then they would always return to the exact same spot every year during the winter months to build their permanent winter dwellings. And here are 2 good examples of the summer dwellings made by George French Angus.
Darnda Tutta is a name for the kangaroo grass. It's quite a literal name and a new name. But because it was a dominant grass, our people would have just known this one as Tutta. But with the varieties of grasses now, we borrowed this one and aboriginalised it to Darnda Tutta, the kangaroo grass. An old recording of a journal's report. The site of the present Norwood was then a magnificent gum forest with the undergrowth of kangaroo grass too high in places for a man to see over. In fact, persons had lost their way in going from Adelaide to Kensington in those days. Small loaves of bread or damper were attained. Johnny cakes, the latter was called. These were baked not in the ashes of the damper. They were about half an inch thick and 6 or 8 inches in diameter, and were baked by being stood upright before the fire, supported by little sticks. From Edward Stevens. The grass tree or the yakka, also known as guru, and different elements of this plant have different names. From Gayamundu, the shaft of this plant, used to make spears. The guru, the base, the tutta to be in the grass, and up the top the purumpa, the flower. This plant's also used and collected resins from to be able to attach it to our spear throwers. Karku is the she oak tree. Karku mangu is the she oak seed pod or the nuts that grow on it. These nuts can be soaked into water to create a sweet citrus drink. But it's also a very dense and strong wood that is the preferred wood to use for our middler, the spear thrower. Kudlila, the winter months from July to September. This photo is from Wirramula, down in Encounter Bay in Ngarrindjeri country.
Bundu is the bulrush plant. You can use most of this plant for eating as well as weaving. So the leaves can be used for weaving baskets. The stem can be eaten. It's similar to cabbage or leek. The root is probably the most versatile part. We call the root wampa, and you can either eat the new shoot, which has a radish texture and is quite nice, or you can chew on the thicker, woodier part of the root, and from the outside bit you can chew that and you can make a white flour that you can bake into bread, or you chew the inner fibre, which is quite woody but very strong fibre for spinning into string, which you make nets from and net bags from.
Wetu is the common reed. Menokora, the reed root, but this wetu was also used for a toy spear or reed spear. Tankjedli is a name for the sedge, the ideal grass to make our mats or also our baskets. Kara is the river red gum, known as the supermarket tree. The leaves are used for medicine with the eucalyptus that lies within. From the branches we could use uri, our clubs, and warna, the boomerangs. It's also used for transportation with canoes made from the bark, and food source with the possums that lie and sleep within the trees. Yuku is a name for a coolaman. Also a kuru can be used for this. Kangolya is the seed vessel of the river red gum that natives soak in water in order to eat. Here are some pictures of yuku, the canoe, and people making them, and these people would have been the Ngarrindjeri from the southeast. Murlabaka is the shield. Murla means dry, baka means bark. Murlabaka is the dry bark shield. Warna is the climbing stick. Used to climb the river red gums, as the first branch is usually too high to reach. So to climb to get to the top in order to catch your pirta, your possums, hetches were made in order to stick your toe in before making another to continue to climb. Yuldi is the stringy bark, used to make bakawardli, the bark hut.
Pain munda is a general name for mistletoes. Some mistletoes are edible and some are poisonous, and you should also be cautious because they are a parasite and sometimes the host plant that they're on can be poisonous. But one of my favourites is what I know as the snotty goggle, and I've been eating it since I was a little kid, is the image in the right hand frame is a sweet berry that tastes something like a lychee, and they're very moreish, but do not chew on the seeds because some seeds of mistletoes are poisonous.
Tandotiti is the lilac tree. And also here we have Barti, the grubs, and Balya, a hook that was created in order to get Barti out of the trees. But be careful, these were taboo foods and only for senior men in our communities.
Narnu is the southern cypress pine tree, and it's a versatile tree for making tools and weapons. From the trunk, you can carve a winder spear, and from the sap from the tree, you can make a resin called Narnu Yaku, which is really good for adhering rocks to timber for making stone axes, which is called a tamiyaku, and also a ganapi, which is an azd which you use like a chisel. Other stone tools that use the resin of the narnu is the bakabakati, the stone knife, which makes a really good sturdy handle. Kangaroos were hunted using nets as well as spears. An example of this net is the munta, and the munta is stretched across a kangaroo's path, and then it's chased into the net and then caught. You can also spear kangaroos to get them, but sometimes you don't want to damage the skin because you want to make a tarantu, a water bag, which you need to have no holes in, and the skin is turned inside out and then filled with water. The fur side is more waterproof than the inside of the kangaroo skin. That's why it's turned inside out. And these bags are used for carrying water over a long distance or when you're away from a water supply. Other bags you might make from kangaroo skins is the yamaru bag, which is this small bag used for carrying berries. Other things you might make out of kangaroo skins or out of possum skins is the parandu, which is our traditional football which kids play. It's very similar to the game Marngrook, which influenced Aussie rules. So we call Aussie rules Tidna Parandu, which means football. In the winter months, animal skins were made into cloaks called wappa, and cloaks could be made out of anything from nantu, the grey kangaroo, to possums, which is pilta. As you can see here, they have a very specific style and pattern of diamonds or squares that are traditionally folded into the skin cloak to make it softer, or in contemporary days we just burn the lines in to show that design. It's very typical to Ghana, this design, and shared with some of our neighbouring language groups. The cloak was worn with the skin on the inside towards your body, with the fur facing out. The fur side is more waterproof than the inside, so it stopped the cloak from rotting if the weather was wet. But it can be worn on the inside, which it is much softer. And you can see it being used here by my son Mapu.
Paro Karakaranya, the water birds. One of the known ones and favourite ones was Gulyo, the black swan. From Gulyo, muka was collected, the eggs. Whittle Whittle was the boy's hairpin and used as an adornment.
Here's some historical images by William Cawthorne depicting Kaurna people hunting birds. So Kaurna typically would catch birds by throwing a wiri club at a flock of birds and then striking them and then collecting them on the ground. That's the most common method, but some other methods that were used were snaring, which you could put a small bush over the top of you and sneak up on a bird and then snare it. And you could do this also to other smaller mammals. There was two main methods of cooking that Kaurna used to cook animals. One was to roast just straight on the fire in the coals, and the other method is an earth oven, where you dig a hole, heat some rocks up in the fire, and then you can take those rocks and you can place them inside the animal's body, in the chest cavity, and then basically seal it up and then place it in the ground and cover it with dirt until it's cooked. And this would make the meat on the inside stew and become softer.
Tori is the summer months from October to December. This picture's from Mirnopari. Mirnopari is within Kaurna country.
During Wiltati, the flowers come out and bloom on things like the yams, attracting our native bee, which we call Gatlabadi. The yam daisy has become really famous because of Bruce Pascoe's dark emu. It can also be called the murnong, but in Kaurna language we call this plant nyampa. It's got an edible root, kind of like a carrot. There's a few different varieties, as you can see in this picture. I find them quite bitter and I don't really like them. Walyu is my favourite yam. There's actually 4 different types of species in this family that we call walyu. There's the chocolate lily, which has a purple flower that smells a little smoky or like chocolate. There's the fringe lily, which is a small little vine that has a smaller tuber. Then there's 2 species that have white flowers, which are called the vanilla lily and are said to smell like vanilla. The small variety has a smaller tuber, and there's another variety which is the common vanilla lily, which has a large tuber. All these tubers taste like a watery radish.
Ngona is the marshmallow. Pitjara is the edible marshmallow root and the fibre. Kuraki is the cocky. Kuraki yuri was the indigenous flax, also used for weaving.
Bakiyaka is the indigenous currant. It's one of a few species of berry that develop its fruit in the spring after the winter rains, which is something very unique to Australia. I came across this plant when my mum told me about it. So my mum used to collect this with my grandmother to make a jam that has a very deep red colour. So I have been collecting it for some years now and try to make a little bit of a tradition to go back and collect these once every 12 months to make jam. The fruit has a sweet, watery, astringent flavour. It's quite pleasant, opposed to my description. It is a really hard plant to germinate. It wants specific conditions. It needs a host fungus to help it germinate. And the name Bakiyaka is a name that we've borrowed in Kaurna language from our closest linguistic neighbour, Naranga, just because it was never recorded in Kaurna language. Gutti, or better known as the quandong, is another spring fruit. It has a big red berry that is sweet and sort of sour. It tastes a little bit like a peach, and its other common name is a native peach. The fruit can be produced into nice sweet jams as well as pies. I've been eating this one since I was a little kid. You can also make necklaces out of the seeds, which will make really nice beads. You can eat the kernel inside the seed, but only in small amounts because it's got a medicinal use. Tilti is also called the indigenous cherry, and it produces a little red to orange berry that is very sweet with a slightly piney aftertaste. You can eat the coloured part but not the green seed, so just hold the little green seed and you eat the orange fruit. Minu is the general name for wattle. Two species that I have collected the seeds to eat from are the golden wattle and the coastal wattle. I prefer the golden wattle because it also produces a sap that is edible. You want to pick it when it's nice and clear and it gets a deep red amber colour as it gets older, and sometimes collects things like ants that eat it. You can just suck on it like a lolly. It doesn't taste like much, and historically Kaurna people used to mix it into water to get extra calories. You find it more in the summer than in the winter because it washes away with the winter rains. I also make digging sticks out of the trunk of the golden wattle because it has a nice bend and shape and also a nice blonde colour in the timber.
Tarnma is the banksia. The nectar that sits in it is known as pitpawi, and when dipping the tarnma into water, the pitpawi leaks out in order to create kundanyi, a sweet drink.
Natalia, thank you for listening, and I hope you found this presentation informative. Nakara, goodbye.
Great. Well, that was fascinating and fabulous, and I was struggling to keep up with the chat. Everyone's clearly quite engaged with that talk, so thank you, James and Jack, and we'll get them to turn their videos on so that we can start the Q&A. I was saying to Jack and James earlier, just watching this presentation made me feel so hungry. You make these snacks and the food sound so delicious, and it just had me thinking, we should just forget about those sourdough starters and start making jam with Indigenous currants. I mean, that paki yucca? That jam sounds amazing. All right, so, and quite a few of you in the chat, it looks like, have tried many of these Indigenous foods before, which is fabulous. So we've got a lot of questions, James and Jack, and I think you've already been keeping an eye on the Q&A. So we'll just start with the first one, which was, where is a good place to purchase the Kaurna native plants? And James, I think you'd put your hand up to answer this.
Yeah, there's a couple of places you can buy them. So for gardening and stuff like that, I like to go to the nursery up in Belair, State Nursery. That's generally got like most plants. There are other places, but I don't know them because that was just really where I went. But then also Something Wild's good to get fresh produce to eat, which is all foraged by Aboriginal foragers, and it's an Aboriginal owned business. So.
Yeah, and there's another one as well, other than Something Wild, I think is Native Co. is another one which is just around plants. So they have some stuff, and there's another one called Australian Native Food Co. as well that they more do like chocolates and jams and those kind of things. So I even got a little plug of some of their jams and their marmalades from some of their stuff as well.
Right. I mean, we might put up a list of some of those places and businesses and resources as well when we post the recording of this, because I think people would be really interested. The second question, kind of, where are we? So what are some good resources where we can find out more information about these plants and their uses?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of books on it. I pretty much got there's some knowledge that I've got from just growing up and eating them and being taught them, but probably the vast majority has been from books. I think the first book that I sort of came across was the one by Tim Lowe. And then there's a few other really good publications, but Tim Lowe's the one that pretty much covers everything. But yeah, I can share a list of resources that you can learn about plants. It's just you have to tailor them to your region because they're just a vast sweep of the country with the plant selection.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough. But that would be fabulous if you could share the resources that you have. I think there's a lot of interest. I'm just trying to group the questions a bit here, but I'm just going to have to go from the top, I think. What are some authentic Indigenous restaurants, as opposed to just suppliers of produce? Are there any authentic Indigenous restaurants?
I'm trying to think of. There's a few Indigenous run. There's the little local co's an Indigenous run business out in Tailem Bend. They do a wattle seed like cold brew, which is good. Other restaurants. There's an Indigenous run cafe out at Gawler, at the Gawler Library. Trying to think of it depends, like authentic. I guess you kind of get them more on, like, if you want the traditional style, you probably get them on tours and stuff like that. But restaurants, I mean, there's plenty of non-Indigenous run restaurants around. Arana's one that you can try some Indigenous plants from around the country. Other than that, in Adelaide, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head.
Yeah, there's only a few places that are more catering, not restaurant style. So there's a fair few catering companies which are very small businesses. We can sort of just compile a list of places that you can go and get some of those foods, but not at a restaurant level.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, I think though, getting some of those businesses and resources would be fabulous, and we can publish them online with the presentation for people who want to go out and support those local businesses and explore. Someone's mentioning a cafe in Gawler too.
Oh, that's the one. Yeah, Marnie.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, in terms of the questions, I'm not going to be able. I can't attempt to group them. So again, I'm just going to go from the top, the one that's been bumped up to the top. Someone was asking if you could say the seasons again and the months for them in Ghana.
I'll leave that one to you, Jack.
Seasons, I guess, were first one's Walteri. Walteri is summer, January to March. Then we've got, after summer is autumn, which is Barnary. After that's Gudlila, the winter months, and Wilteri, which we're in at the moment, which is the spring months. There's a couple of others that we use. Another one's they're more like hybrids, which is one's called Wadla Wangadi, where the branches start to fall. And that's usually leading in just before winter to tell you when to sort of start building all your wadleys. I can't remember the other one off my head, but that's...
No, it's just Woolty, isn't it?
Yeah, Woolty, yeah, so...
Which is it's been combined now to be Woolty.
Yeah.
Right, and Jack in particular, you can Google Jack, and there are lots of videos online. You've been teaching Kaurna language for quite a while, and there's some really great videos online of you pronouncing a lot of these Kaurna words, if anyone is interested. I think what we might do is compile quite a resource that we can then publish online. There seems to be a lot of interest, which is great, and which actually reminds me that I should actually state this is our biggest talking history yet in terms of the number of people signed up. So this clearly is of huge interest to people, and we've never had so many questions on the Q&A. So that's fabulous. Now there's a question here. It's had quite a few likes, which is, do you have any information about how Kaurna people grouped or classified plants and animals? For example, based upon organism, use, stage in life, sex, social status, totemic association? So about classifying plants and animals.
Yeah, so they all plants feed into three categories. One's bardo, which is meats. Other one's goya, which is anything seafood, and the other one's mai, which is any vegetable like food. So everything's separated into one of those categories.
Okay, great. Now, someone else has said, and it's been bumped up the list very quickly. James, are you publishing a book about Kaurna food? How's it going?
Well, there's a resource for the Kaurna community being developed, and we'll just see where that ends up going, but potentially.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that for everyone. Okay, so James, you mentioned your personal yearly jam making tradition. Do either of you have other yearly or seasonal traditions that you try and follow or are trying to bring back?
I don't know. I've started a yam garden, which I guess really you only see them flower this time of the year, which has been really, I mean, it's been good because now I can identify them really clearly in the bush because I see them every day as I go past hanging out my laundry. But yeah, no, they are, that's probably really the most seasonal thing that I've done other than the jam. I try to eat like gutti or quandongs, and the native currants once a year. COVID stopped it this year, so I'm in Canberra, and I wasn't able to fly back for it, and they're all fruiting right at the moment. So I'm a bit jealous of South Australians because
drive on the weekend.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can come back now, but it's all a bit too late. Yeah, and they just don't seem to grow here on this side because it's a bit too cold for quandongs. But yeah, the yams have probably been the most interesting one for me because there's like about 15 different types of yams that Kaurna traditionally ate, and they're about the same across like southern Australia. And then it's just like, and there's heaps of orchids and stuff which are illegal unless you have a permit to grow them, I think. I have a couple of orchids that I've purchased in my garden. Again, lots of vanilla chocolate lilies growing in my garden. They seem to produce the biggest yams. And then the daisy yam as well.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit different. I'm more on the meat side of things. So at the moment, obviously, like not just good deer growing, but there's a whole bunch of stuff growing. So that's sort of what we're going for at the moment. When we head into right into summer, then it's a fish. There's more of a fish diet, so we go fishing a lot more during the summer months, and then we usually on the winter, that's when we're doing more of the game. So it feeds into sort of the older eating habits of Kaurna before colonisation as well.
Yeah, fabulous. Now I'm trying to keep track of both the Q&A and the chat here. There's a comment that I'm going to just highlight. Someone said everyone's asking for these resources that we're now talking about compiling and making available, and someone's saying it would be good to have these resources to share in schools to counter the European style information that's mostly available to kids. Now, I know you've been doing some work in that area anyway, but I'm also thinking the History Trust is looking to redevelop a number of resources, especially around South Australian history for schools. So I think we as the History Trust will undertake to try and get a lot more of these resources into schools through our channels. But Jack, I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about the work you do with schools. And
yeah, I guess there's a big push in native gardens at the moment as well. Unfortunately, some of those a lot of the plants that are being used in those aren't really majority of the plants here and have multiple purposes. We're really big on trying to engage, like James, growing stuff at home. You get the opportunity to start noticing it as well, and working with children. You want to not just give them an opportunity to understand the plants that are growing around, but creating any sensory opportunities, not just feeling it, seeing it, watching the process of things, but also to be able to taste things as well. So we if you've got native gardens in school, start getting some of the edible stuff in there as well, but keep it limited and make sure you've got the right stuff as well. But definitely through that we're learning and teaching language through that as well. I come with the plant knowledge around from a Kaurna perspective, and it's really good to eventually start to see the plant that the name for like through language teaching. I've learned the name before I knew the plant, and I've been lucky enough to do a lot of stuff with James and have been able to put all that into practice as well.
Yeah, that's great.
There's just on the history thing, if you want more like stuff around South Australian history, the authors that I like are, I think it's Robert Foster, and then Tom Garr also writes pretty well on Indigenous histories, and there's Amanda, I want to say Pinchbeck, but I'm not sure.
Nettlebeck.
Nettlebeck, that's the one, sorry. They're all really great authors. They're all non-Indigenous, but they cover the topics, and I've learned like so much through that as well. Like, I mean, there's stuff that we generally know just engaging with Kaurna language that we learn just through the missionaries recording the language, so we learn a bit of history around that. But those ones were really interesting. There were some stories I've never heard, like the Port Lincoln Wars is really interesting. Bungala nearly beat the British at the height of the British Empire, so that was pretty amazing, and pushed the colonists out of Port Lincoln. So yeah, and Kaurna almost tried to poison the Torrens River at one point and tried to get rid of the British that way, but the missionaries convinced them not to. So there's some pretty cool histories there, and interesting histories of resistance.
Yes, yeah, that sounds fascinating, actually. All right, we're going to add them to the resources. That'll be fabulous. Look, we are running out of time. There's maybe one of the questions about Indigenous food gardens in schools. We might take that offline, because we might actually see if we can work with the two of you to develop some of those resources to give some of those schools some more guidelines or some suggestions about what they might want to include in the Indigenous food gardens. But there's another one. In the context of the human population being so large just now, do either of you have any thoughts on a foraging philosophy?
I mean, like, I'll just approach this from another perspective, but trying to answer it in a similar way. So, like, Kaurna people in, like, the 12-month cycle of the year, like, would eat 120 species of plants. And that's more than what we have in our Western, kind of global diet that we have now. Like, I mean, I probably only eat a handful of about 50 plants that, have been collected from all over the world. Like, thinking about like an apple from Kazakhstan, or like a potato from the like Andes, and like where their origin point is, or like broccolini or broccoli from Italy, and how those plants are migrated across. Like, we've just collected all these specific plants that we eat, where actually a lot of Indigenous environments have about 120, even in the desert, they have somewhere between 100 and 120 plants available in any one language group. So you kind of spread your diet quite, I don't know, like, you don't take just from one plant because one plant tastes good. You eat everything equally and in season, so that the plants kind of come back. And I think that's probably more kind of looking at population expansion. This is kind of one way you could combat that. But I guess like the Kaurna population was roughly, I think, documented, each family was about 100 people, and upward of, I think, about almost about 1,000, I think the British estimated that, but that was post smallpox. So the population was probably more like 5,000 to 10,000 people across that area. So thinking about that diet and sustainability, like Kaurna would have been eating everything sustainably in that area without the killing off other species. So that's probably about the population that could sustain that sort of area. But yeah, Kaurna weren't depleting, soil conditions. You weren't having catastrophic bushfires. You weren't having all these kind of extreme things that come when you've cleared massive amounts of land and stuff like that. So our diet currently and agriculture can, I think they've just said that what we can produce 3 times what the Australia needs. but I think that's at the detriment of the environment. So I don't think it's just our current agriculture is sustainable for all that much longer. So I guess I don't know if that answered the question, but essentially, like, yeah, we ate a lot more food 200 years ago than we ate now, for sure.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it did, and it answered another question that had just risen to the top too, which was around that sustainability piece of, you know, how did you harvest and to ensure that the plants were sustainable. Listen, we are over time and we've still got so many questions, so we might take Jack and James up on their generous offer to perhaps answer some of these offline as well, and we'll make them all available. There's really fascinating questions in here. So we'll export them and we'll get those that we can answered. This has been fabulous. Thank you so much, James and Jack. What I did forget to mention at the beginning, apologies, is that this event not only was a Talking History event, but it's a special event as part of the inaugural Nature Festival here in South Australia, which is still going for another 4 days until the 4th of October. So you can go online at naturefestival.org.au or look up Nature Festival SA on Facebook and check out what else they're doing in this space. So thank you again, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. Like I said, we had a bumper audience, clearly extremely... Sorry, I'm keeping an eye on the chat. Someone thinks you've got a killer beard, Jack.
Drinking.
Very good. So look, thank you again. As just a reminder, this will be recorded. We'll release it in a couple of days. It might take us a little bit longer to pull together some of these other resources we're talking about, but we'll certainly endeavour to give you as much information as we can about what you've heard about tonight. You can, if you want to learn more about Talking History and to keep an eye out on when these talks become live, go to our website, historysa.gov.au, or follow us on Facebook. All right, so I think that's it. So thank you again, Jack and James, and thank you again to Britt and Jade behind the scenes. This has been fabulous. I can't believe the number of questions we've got here. It's great. All right, thank you all for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you again next time.
Thanks everyone. Nakara.
Nakara.
Nakara.